I always had a joke, right? And you know this. Before I met you, I always said I wanted a girl with dark hair, light eyes, and she wasn't a liberal. And
Here we are.
and here we are. So it just goes to show you, put it out there, and it will come to you.
Manifestation is real, people.
And boom, we are live. What's up, everybody? Couple Casuals Podcast, episode number 30. I am your host, Stefano, and today I have a very special episode for you guys. I have a very special guest for you guys. This conversation will be very meaningful to me. The guest is very meaningful to me. And I think before we start, I got to kind of like preface it with like a little bit of a backstory. So when I started this podcast a couple years ago, I figured a couple things. I expected a couple things. I knew I'd probably be nervous throughout the process. I knew I'd probably meet people along the way. I knew I'd have fun, and I'd probably develop a skill set like communication. But I never expected to meet a wonderful girl like you. So about a year ago, she reached out to me asking to have a conversation about a lot of the things that we are in alignment with. So through a sequence of events, we ended up having that conversation. And little did I know, when I was sitting down to have that conversation, I would be having a conversation with my future girlfriend, who I'm very proud of, and I'm very proud to have here again for the second time. 9 episodes ago, we had our first conversation, and 9 episodes later, we're here on episode 30 to sit down and talk again. So, Rebecca Nobrega, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Wow. I feel so giddy and like fangirly right now.
You like that? You like that intro?
I do.
That's good, right?
It was amazing.
But I had to kind of like start there because I'm sure people watching, they obviously know like a little bit of the backstory of us. I'm very proud of it. Like I talk to you and I tell you all the time how proud I am of us and like how far we've come. And I think a lot of the ongoing conversations that we have are very useful for people. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I think we're going to start today. So just to preface it for everybody, full disclosure, we're not talking throughout this conversation from a top-down perspective. We're not talking from a pedestal. We're talking as two individuals in a relationship that have an everlasting yearning to grow and develop and value things like love, intimacy, communication, and the different dynamics of masculinity, femininity, and everything that kind of goes along with it in a relationship. So this conversation will be in depth, I think, surrounding a lot of those topics, and I'm very excited to share some of my perspectives, and I'm sure you're very excited to share your perspectives. But that's kind of how I want to preface it for everybody, so that they know that this is a very humble conversation. We're learning, we're growing, we're always improving as individuals and as two people in a relationship. So to start it off with saying that, I kind of want to throw you a curveball a little bit.
Go for it.
So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball because I know we discussed some topics that I wanted to get into, but I'm going to start with this. What does love mean to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think we've talked about this before. I think you mentioned this on your last podcast too, but after the fact, potentially.
Did
I think you did.
I've talked to you about this before 100%.
Yeah.
But just to unpack it for the viewers, what does it mean? And then I'll give my perspective too.
Can we hear yours first?
Absolutely not. This is not the way interviews go. Just dig deep. Allow it to come from, shoot from the hip, Rebecca.
Well, it's defined differently for everybody, so it depends what you're asking. I view love as something that's like, at least for me, it's something, oh my gosh, it's such a loaded question. I don't know. I feel it's like, it's an incredible feeling. It's something that doesn't come often. I think if you find it, it's something that you nurture. And for me, love is something that I value deeply and cherish. So that's just very short and sweet for now. So let's hear yours.
So my definition of what I think love is I'm stealing it from somewhere else. But I liked when I've told you this before when we talked about love. I liked the scene in The Wedding Crashers where Owen Wilson is sitting down with Rachel McAdams. This is kind of cheesy, but it's fucking cool. Wait, I don't know. No, wait, he didn't say it at that point, but that was a nice scene too, that beach scene. But before, they were discussing love, and she was talking about her speech at a wedding or whatever, and she asked him what is like the definition of love, and he said your soul's recognition of its
Yes.
counterpoint in another. And I think that's an interesting take on it. And I think love is commitment. I think love is complete dedication from one individual to another to then make a union and a companionship that is something so strong and also fragile at times too. But love is, I'm going to do everything that I can to improve and be committed to you and be loyal to you, and it's for life. That's what I think. So I don't take it lightly when you say I love you. So that's like leads me to my next question. When do you think it's appropriate to say I love you?
I think once your definition of what love is met.
I agree.
And understood. So, for example, in your specific case, I think my definition of love is quite similar. You expanded on that. So when you feel like maybe you found that person and you've now chosen to love this, you feel love, but then what happens after that? It becomes a choice, right? Love is a choice.
That's
so if you
another
feel
thing.
like maybe you found that person and you say, you know what? I think love is a commitment and something, love that is something is lifelong, and you found that person you want to share that with, then right? It's like a buildup of different moments, and eventually it's almost like you have like this courage, and it just wants to come out of your mouth. I think that's when you say it, because it'll feel natural.
So innate, it's something innate, and you say it when you feel it, or do you think there's some sort of internal dialogue that needs to be kind of ran through before you say it? And then I'm going to get into the next question of who says it first, which I think is interesting for the viewers. And we've talked about this too, but just to kind of preface it a little bit more, is there's a big difference between lust and love. I think those two are big distinctions to make, especially in a world that we live today in social media, where the next best thing is 2 seconds away. So people feel there's always something better. So there's much effort that needs to be put into something like that, but a distinction needs to be made between lust and love. Would you agree?
I do agree, but also I think it depends on the person. But equally, there is a difference between loving somebody and being in love with somebody.
Okay.
And I think sometimes people can also get that confused, but then that's when it can also fall under that category of lust as well.
And who should say it first? You could be honest. Remember, you have to be honest here on Couple Casuals podcast. Don't worry about if people are going to be upset or what are they going to think. What do you think?
I think it varies on the couple. It varies on the person. It varies on what they value and what they want. For me, I think,
we can talk about us.
Yeah, I think I love that you said it first. I was ready to say it, but I wanted to wait because I think it's, and I hope I phrase this well, I feel like there's no greater, how do I phrase this? I've said this to you before. It's like when a man chooses you, you want to be, I'm not saying this right.
Just say it. And we'll sort through it.
Basically, my preference is I think it's nice if the man says it first.
Right.
I think you also give him that honor.
Right.
You give him that. But also, a more traditional man will probably want to say it first.
100%.
But it doesn't mean it's wrong if they don't say it first.
Well, we can kind of piggyback off that, and I'm going to give my perspective, so I'm not going to leave that yet. But we can kind of piggyback off that in the comparison to who should propose. It's pretty established that the man should propose to the woman, and how much from the outside looking in is it odd when we see a woman proposing to a man, which I actually requested for you to like pull up on YouTube, I think like a couple weeks ago, because I actually wanted to see it in my first hand, which is very interesting. And I guess to your point, everybody's different, but yes, I would have, not that I would have been disappointed, but it would have been unfortunate if you said it first, because it would have been unfortunate because I wanted to say it first, because I wanted to give you that respect. And then I also wanted to show you my commitment and then my love for you by saying those words. But I had a hard time grappling with it and I actually reached out to my friends, which I've been very transparent with you about. And that's why it was interesting. I kind of wanted to bring that up because I've talked to my friends about it too. Because when you haven't loved somebody for a while and then you do, you wonder, how do you approach it? And that's why I think this conversation might be useful for people, because it's two regular people here who value the dynamics of a relationship and that are always learning the dynamics of a relationship and the components that go with it. But one of the things that comes up in a relationship, a milestone, if you will, is when you say, I love you. And I think the man should say it. I think it's a beautiful thing, and the man should say it. Give the woman that decency and that respect of saying it first. And then it also shows your commitment to her and a binding force that now you're expressing a vulnerable state by saying, I love you. I asked some of my friends about it. It was pretty casual encounters, and probably to your point, it was what they felt and they kind of just said it. But I wanted to make it a little bit special because I think it's a special moment, and I think it's something worth making special for you and for the girl. And then I gave you that necklace when I said I love you, and I thought that was a very important time. But there's many components that come into love, and love is a beautiful thing, and that's kind of where I want to start now. So one of the books that you suggested, but a lot of things that me and you do is we share knowledge and we share podcasts, and we share things that we value. And one of the things that you shared with me was a book by Jay Shetty called, is it 8 Ways to Love?
8 Rules of Love. And that's when I knew I loved you, but we didn't say it yet.
So yeah, exactly. So it was a little bit early on. And I said, sure, if I wasn't with you, maybe I wouldn't have went on my own and fucking read that book. Yeah. But I was always interested in intimacy and love, and I was learning a lot about it previous to meeting you, which we can get into and I've talked to you about extensively. But kind of to preface this first kind of conversation, this first topic about love, is in that book, the reason why I respected it so much is because the very first chapter and the very first segment of conversations are revolving around solitude and around learning to be alone, and how it starts with the individual. Before we even talk about a relationship, we have to talk about ourselves. We have to talk about the individual. And I was a big believer in that in any aspect of life, especially when it comes to love or finding a partner. So there was 4 stages of love that he outlined. It was solitude, compatibility, healing, and connection. Right. So over the next little bit, me and Rebecca are going to kind of get into those umbrella topics and kind of get into some things. But let me throw this out to you. Solitude as an individual, and then also sometimes that people are in relationships, they could feel alone. They could feel alone in a relationship. And even before you get into a relationship, you have to be alone. So touch on it. What are your thoughts on it?
I personally think the worst thing you can feel is lonely in your relationship. It's a sad place to be in.
Right.
But it's just an example and proof that work has to get done with yourself, right? And the solitude should not go away once you're in that relationship. So it's important to keep growing, keep developing yourself. And it doesn't mean the work stops. It just means that you reach a place where you're content on your own. Because once you're in the relationship, your life, the person you're with obviously is of great significance. It's someone you enjoy spending time with, but you still very much value your identity, your friend group, your XYZ, your individuality, and that solitude. So it's important to establish in the relationship, but outside of the relationship also.
It's a big component that I think a lot of people overlook, and it kind of reverts back to my consistent studying of Stoicism and how it starts internally rather than externally. Yeah. And if you look at a relationship as something to fill a wound or fill an empty space in which you feel, that is only going to lead down dark paths, in my opinion. So I think before, which I've been very vocal to you about, I spent a lot of time as an individual developing myself and grappling with vulnerabilities and shit that I didn't want to fucking really deal with too much. But you learn who you are first. Yeah. And then when you meet somebody, you learn who you are with them. So that's what I'm doing right now with you. And just to give you an appreciation, you've helped me see more of myself. You've helped me learn more about myself. And you can only learn so much about yourself previous to being in a relationship, but it's required. And then when you are in a relationship, you then learn more about yourself and who you are in that relationship. So let's touch on values. How important is it when you're alone to establish and get to know yourself, your character, and your values? Because your values are actually who you are. Because to define values loosely, it's what you strive towards, it's what represents you, it's what's in alignment with your character. So touch on how important values are and like what are some of the things that you should establish previous to being in a relationship when you're alone.
It's probably the most important thing that you can learn, discover, and continue developing and continue to uncover. Because if you know what you value, your discernment becomes that much greater when you're trying to select a partner, right? And it's easier to have conversations, especially when you're so strong on what you believe in and you lead with that conviction and you know who you are. It would be that much easier, let's say, to let the wrong one go or to identify the right person. Because ultimately, let's say we're talking on the definition of love being that this is my forever partner, let's say, love to marry, let's just say, for example. So think about how much time you're going to spend with that person. If you value, let's say, exercise, and the person you're with does not, that value system doesn't align. So if you're valuing doing XYZ and exercising and they're not, there's already a wedge. And that's just one thing. Imagine there are multiple areas in which your value system doesn't align. You're probably not the most compatible. There could be chemistry, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond, physical appearance. It goes beyond all that. It's connection. It's long term. So your value system and the alignment there is what's going to ultimately allow for longevity.
And I want to talk
in my
about,
opinion.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the stages, which you mentioned attraction is not the only thing. I want to talk about the stages of love, but I'm going to kind of reference a little bit, I always had a joke, right? And you know this. Before I met you, I always said I wanted a girl with dark hair, light eyes, and she wasn't a liberal. And
Here we are.
and here we are. So it just goes to show you, put it out there and it will come to you.
Manifestation is real, people.
Yeah, manifestation is real. I guess you can say I somewhat manifested you as well as you manifested me. We have a lot of shared values, and the interesting part is when we first started talking, it was in the regards of a conversation, which you can find episode 21, A Couple Casuals Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But the important thing was that we met, we started talking, and instantly we were sharing values. We were sharing things that mean things to each other, that mean things to me, and that what means to you, and they happen to coincide. And what we were talking about was self-development and a lot of those things that surround those topics, which we instantly had a stimulating conversation that ultimately led to espresso martinis and then a long-term relationship. Right. So you look at that, and first of all, it's a beautiful thing because it kind of skips the surface level conversation, which I've always been interested in, which that's what was my appreciation of the way we connected. But we shared each other's values. And then that's when that foundation was built. And then we grew from there. So it's important to spend time within yourself and then learn who you are before you get into a relationship, because then you're going to just ultimately have to learn more of who you are when you're in a relationship. So now the stages of kind of meeting somebody. The first thing, people will tell you so many different things, but and looks don't matter. People say that, right? But I think they do matter to a certain extent. I think when you meet somebody, like I make the joke with the dark hair, blue eyes, and you fit that description perfectly. And then ultimately getting past that is where the good stuff is, which is sharing our values, your personality, and all the things that we get into further. But understanding that you're going to be attracted to somebody physically, but knowing that that is not going to take you until the end, because looks do fade. It's the cliche thing that people say. It's eventually they will. But you meet somebody based off an attraction, and then you get into the real stuff, which is who they are. And if that person or you have not developed yourself, or at least looked inside to see who you are, what do you represent? What are you putting out here? Who are you as an individual? That while you're alone, because eventually you may be alone again. So it's important to know and grapple with the idea of who you are when you're alone. But attraction then brings you in, then sharing values, sharing time, and then ultimately working on your relationship. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Now, if you're a person, let's say, that isn't looking for that connection and you solely value looks, then looks will matter. And it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your values don't align. But looks are not enough to keep somebody around.
Right.
That's the point. Because eventually, that the novelty sort of wears off. Not that you don't remain attracted to your partner, but you start becoming attracted to their personality, to their values, and you get to know who they are. And if you don't like that and that's not attractive to you, looks alone are not enough if you're valuing the emotional connection and you're looking for something long term.
Exactly. That's why it's important to understand your values. For example, we can use a very common example, which is it's somewhat a part of this culture and what we see. Sometimes people say, if you have money, a girl will come to you. Now, we've talked about this.
Like, what kind of girl?
Exactly. That's the question that people need to ask them, especially guys with money. There's a lot of guys with money that they maybe they value beauty though, and that's the only thing they value. But again, to each his own, depending on what they value, and that's why it's important understanding what you value. But if you value money, then you're attracted to an external thing. So what happens if you then lose that money? Is that person that is attracted to you now going to leave? Or there's always a person that has more money than you. So if that person comes in, if that person you're with values money the most, is she going to leave? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, again, it depends on what you're looking for, right? Somebody who is looking for lifestyle will be attracted to somebody with money. And so let's say, for example, the dynamic of a very hyper successful man. He can attract a lot of women, but it's the type of woman, depending on what he receives, will be what he's looking to attract. If he's looking for somebody that values emotional connection, a woman that also values that, okay, there can be alignment. But if he is not looking for emotional connection and that woman is, he's only going to attract a woman, let's say, who values lifestyle, because a woman who values emotional connection will not stay. He'll be too busy and money's not enough to keep her because she values the emotional connection, which she ends up lacking in that specific dynamic.
Should we share some things that we value?
Go for it.
Well, firstly, when you're looking for a woman, you value mother. Can she be a good mother for my children?
The nurturing aspect.
The nurturing aspect, which we're going to get into femininity and masculinity, and I think the nuances of that are a very important conversation. So there's that. There's family. There's nurturing, the care, the consideration, respect, which is a big one. We want to talk about that because I see a lot of relationships where it doesn't seem very respectful at times. Like the woman may be disrespectful to the man or vice versa. So there's that. There's exercise and health. There's goal orientation. What do you do with your time outside of work, etc. So that's why I make the joke about, I didn't want a liberal or whatever. I make a joke about that all the time because it's a joke because under the umbrella of when you see that, you can kind of already suspect on the value structure because it won't be in alignment with me. And I think everybody has the right to determine what their values are and what they want to attract. So do you want to share a couple?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in alignment with you on those fronts. Honestly, like just echoing that, you look for someone who, let's say, could be a mother, and I look for somebody who can be a father, but more than that, it's a leader.
Right.
Can he lead? Like there was an analogy that was said in a podcast where it was, if you were blindfolded, can this person lead you? And I believe that wholeheartedly, that you, for example, I completely have that trust in you, right?
Thank you.
But that's something that I look for, is that leadership, the discipline, the intellect. To me, that's something that's really important and high on my value structure, as well as that respect. And for me as a female, while I know you mentioned we'll go into the femininity, masculinity later, it is, as a female, what I value, which is that emotional safety, is feeling safety physically, but equally emotionally. But I know we'll go into that.
We'll get into that. That's kind of where I'm going to get into eventually. But let's go to the next kind of stage of love, which is compatibility. Compatibility is an interesting one because once you figure out who you are and what you bring, because a lot of times, like, what do you? There's a saying like, oh well, what do you look for in a partner? First of all, you are who you attract who you are. That's where we got to start. Then there's like the understanding of like, well, what do you want in a partner, or what are you looking for in a partner? Maybe flip it a bit and go, who are you going to be in contribution to a partnership, to an intimate relationship? Understanding that. So there's compatibility. So compatibility is the way you can kind of define it is like the essence of getting along and how you and your partner or you and the person you're pursuing are going to kind of jive in this world, especially in a long-term commitment. So what do you think are some important aspects of compatibility, and how should people find the best path forward to be compatible with somebody?
I mean, it kind of starts with the top of our conversation. It starts with knowing yourself. It starts with knowing your values and seeing what that alignment actually looks like. That's just a very high level answer. I mean, feel free to.
Well, we could talk about dating because a lot of the time it provides challenges for people now. Like, just to piggyback off how we met, me putting myself out there through the podcast eventually is what caught your eye, and then you were interested in similar conversations, so that's how
Right.
we reached out. So it was predicated off of our values and our shared beliefs. So that was a good start. So there's the testament to there is be yourself authentically, show up as you, put it out there, and then there's going to be somebody out there that's going to appreciate it. So we could start with dating. What's a good first date idea?
Like
And I'll give mine.
an activity is nice.
You can't steal my answer because you know exactly that that's going to be mine.
Something where you can have conversation.
Right.
You can have conversation, maybe delve into somebody's interests. I that kind of falls into activity, but a good first date is an opportunity where you can get to know somebody a little bit, whatever that might look like. I know everyone's opinion is different.
I think it's walking. I think an activity-based date is ideal. I think going for a walk, weather permitting, we do live in Canada, but that's also a good test too. See how much he's willing to actually show up for you. Go for a walk in the snow, then you'll figure out who you guys are. But
For real.
no, in reality, I'm major against like the whole sit down dinner thing. I don't
Okay.
think that's a good idea for a first date
Why?
because it's somewhat of an interview kind of aspect. Get a little bit loose at first. You know, maybe if you want to go for a couple of drinks or whatever, a couple casuals, no pun intended, maybe then, then you kind of get to know each other on a different level. But there has to be something else other than the traditional, let's go to Harbor 60 for a steak or let's go to Locale like we did eventually. But let's do these kinds of things. I think an activity-based date is ideal, whatever it is, which what we did. We went for a walk at Lake Wilcox. We went for a walk, and then you get to talk with each other and actually move. I think it's ideal, and it sets a good foundation. Then follow it up with a dinner date or something like that, because then it's a little bit more formal, and you're heading in that direction of where you guys are inevitably going. But I think dating is the first aspect of it. So then that's when you'll kind of determine your compatibility. But really what it comes down to is knowing yourself. And then when you meet somebody else, you learn more about them too. But another thing that we talk about a lot is fighting styles and non-negotiables.
Yes.
So kind of, you've taught me about this a little bit. So I'm going to throw this to you. You kind of get into that a bit. What is fighting styles and what are non-negotiables?
Well, I think you know those answers based on how well you know yourself. So, for example, things will be a lot easier when you know the way you fight or the way that you process information or what you need in those moments. But understanding that what you need in that moment, for example, could be completely different than what your partner needs and how they respond. So it's about knowing yourself and communicating that. And sometimes it could be nice to have that conversation before something like that happens, right? It's like, hey, when you're in a fight or when you're angry or when you're sad or whatever that might be, and the emotional outcome of whatever the argument, let's say, is, what do you need in that moment? Because when you understand your partner and you already have that expectation, you know what's coming, and you don't need to internalize and personalize it because we process things a little bit differently.
Men and women.
So
yeah.
Pardon me?
Men and women, do they process things differently? especially in
Differently,
those
and then the
situations?
individual itself
Right.
processes things individually, right? So if you know yourself, you can then communicate. For example, let's say you need a second to process something,
Yeah.
right? You communicate that, but then your partner knows that it's not them, it's not personal, it's I need a second so that I can process and provide you with an answer that's not solely coming from a place of emotion, let's say, because you're working towards productivity.
Right.
You don't want to be reactive.
Right.
So, but you have to know yourself and acknowledge that, and then in turn communicate that.
Exactly.
So that's my opinion when it comes to the fighting style specifically.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, it's very important to kind of have these discussions. And you learn it lifetime too, which we have as well. But men and women are different. Women are more emotional than men,
right,
generally speaking, and men are more logical than
Right.
women. So a lot of the times when me and you are discussing a contentious topic or there's something of a high magnitude in front of us, you may be more emotionally led and I might be more logically led, which may work in some situations, but there may be an instance where you're coming, this is for the men out there, like where your girl is coming to you to basically just listen, looking for a ear to kind of vent to, or somebody to look for maybe wisdom, but not always a solution. Men are very solution oriented.
Right.
So sometimes it could go a long way to kind of accept that emotional side in certain instances, hear them out, and then maybe at a later date, maybe they need a second, maybe at a later date provide some solutions depending on the topic. But fighting styles are important because we are always going to encounter something that's difficult. So you must be able to communicate through that. Communication is a very, very important skill. And communication is not only just speaking, but it's also listening.
Right.
So when you're having these difficult conversations, you have to be able to listen and you have to be able to communicate too. And when you're communicating, you're not just waiting for the opportunity to speak again. So when these tough conversations kind of come up or tough situations come up, like, listen, we're in it for life together. So we're going to encounter things that are going to be difficult
Yeah.
and that are going to be hard. So we have to figure out that when we come to a disagreement, which we have and which we will again, how are we going to get through that? How are we going to be able to navigate through that type of difficult conversation? Because if you can't have a difficult conversation with the person that you're with, maybe you're not with the right person.
Yeah, and the magic is in the repair. It's how you repair. It's how you come back from those. So you do that by being productive. You do that by communicating, right? So let's say you don't communicate what your fighting style is, or you're learning and that's fine, but your partner doesn't want to receive it. And let's say you need 5 minutes and your partner's like, no, I want an answer right now. That's not going to work for you. And in fact, that's going to cause you to disconnect a little bit more because you're suddenly feeling like, wait a second, I need a second to process and they're not giving me that space to do that. I want to disconnect. And then what are your chances of repairing successfully and meaningfully and being able to move forward? So communicating that, which in turn can turn into a beautiful repair. It doesn't mean you can never argue or anything like that. And when you are in a relationship or otherwise, whatever, you're having disagreements, it's how you come out of that.
Right.
But the outcome and how you come out of that solely depends on knowing yourself, how you process the information, and how you're able to show up in that moment. The level of awareness, understanding, that's a huge factor.
I love that because we operate differently, especially men and women. So that's what I mean when I say that when you're in a relationship, you're learning more about yourself in a relationship, which you've helped me done tremendously. So I appreciate that.
Likewise.
And then let's talk about non-negotiables. What is a non-negotiable?
A non-negotiable in a long-term relationship is something that you cannot live without, basically. Whereas a compromise is something that you can live without. So a non-negotiable, whatever that looks like for you. So I don't know what a simple...
For you, it'd probably be like a farm animals in the house and everything, like a bunch of dogs, and that's
like it's animals for life. It's 5 dogs. It's a cow. Your mom's gonna be like, "This girl's crazy." It's like that's like a very simple, surfacey sort of, not surfacey, but a simple answer for me. I love animals and I value having them in my life. So for me, it's me communicating to you and say, "Hey, I'm gonna have animals forever." If you hate animals, that's not going to work for you. So our values right there alone wouldn't align, and then that's also a compatibility thing.
Right.
But that's considered a non-negotiable.
Right.
But then you can do something, you could talk about something a little bit more substantive, which would be, let's say, it's universally not condoned, but let's say cheating.
Right.
Let's say
that's a non-negotiable.
That's a non-negotiable, right? I don't want a partner who cheats. Okay, but let's say your partner's like, well, I don't mind doing that. It's not a match.
Right.
Right. So that's a non-negotiable. So it's about knowing yourself and then also communicating that, because a lot of times when people, let's say, don't work out, or something I heard recently, divorces, a lot of divorces, it's not because of money. It's not because of the death of a child. It's because of uncommunicated expectations.
Right.
So it's your responsibility to communicate your needs, what you expect, but also it gives that person an opportunity to make an informed decision about you and vice versa. If it's lifelong, that person deserves to know the real you, because what you show them right now, if it suddenly changes 10 years from now, they'll say, "Hey, what happened?" You can't say, "I've always been this way," because you never communicated it.
Exactly. And I think touching on divorces, I think the deterioration of a relationship happens one small step at a time.
That's right.
And that's what we learned from that podcast with that divorce lawyer, which was very interesting. It happens from one disrespectful behavior, from one lack of care, from one inability to put in effort, from all or a sequences of events that happen slowly but surely that eventually, to touch on kind of compatibility, remove your compatibility and start to send you guys in two different directions. So one other non-negotiable could be social, something that you value. Like we talk about this a lot. Like if you're with a partner and my inability or desire to want to grow relationships with your friends, people important to you or your family, etc. That would be a non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
That would be something because we value family. We value our friends. Our social circles are very important to us. So that would be a non-negotiable. If you're with a partner and she or he is reluctant to want to get new friends or want to be out there and be your companion in connection with your previous life, your friends, etc. So that would be a non-negotiable. I think it's very important to highlight things like that. But it's important to communicate these things. And I think it goes a long way. But in saying that, we can go to the next topic, which is healing. I think healing looks very different for different people in different scenarios. So an example of healing could be post-breakup, which I think if you want to learn about yourself, the best thing you can do is get your heart broken. So not to say that you should do that, but just be wary of it. It's a possibility. You're vulnerable when you're in a relationship. These are things that can happen. That's why you must learn how to be alone, because one day you might be alone again by your own admission or somebody else's. So I think basically we need, so from compatibility, what was I just saying again?
Well, you were talking about post-breakup.
Oh, so healing. Yes, exactly.
Healing,
So healing can also be within a relationship too.
Yeah.
Like to your point about after being in an argument, after being in a fight, finding a way to heal from that. And also in saying that too, I think it's important to do that collectively. So what do you think that looks like when you're healing or when you're actively moving forward together in becoming a better relationship and healing things together? How do you navigate that? How do you go through that?
So you're talking solely on the basis of being in a relationship, right?
Or being solo. We can kind of touch on both.
Well, it depends. I think healing is certainly an inside job. It does start with you, but if you are in a relationship, it is something that you can do collectively, as you put it, and collaboratively, depending. Right. It also comes down to the willingness to help each other heal, the willingness to understand each other, to recognize that certain things are not personal, let's say. We're human beings. We're going to go through moments of suffering. We're going to need to heal, right? But it really comes down to that communication. And you might not have an understanding the first time around. And it might require more conversations that are going to be draining, that are going to be dreadful. Because ultimately what we all want, we all love when, we're feeling all the love. We love when everything is good, but that's not reality. So it's about how do we repair this? And what is it that we can understand more about each other to repair it quicker? And then still maintain that respect for each other, but doing it from a place of respect and love, not from a place of, I just want to get it over with.
Right.
It's what you said earlier about when people need to listen. People listen to reply versus listening to understand.
100%.
The sooner you understand, you know what to do the next time around. You're like, okay, I know how they process this. I know what they need in this moment. How can I, as their partner, show up that way? But then it also comes down to choice. Do you, as somebody's partner, want to show up in that way for them? So it's very complex. It depends on the dynamic. It depends on the individual. It depends on their values in terms of growth, showing up, their character, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And you mentioned something there, respect, which is going to kind of segue me to the last component of love, last stage rather of love, which is connection. So one of the things we've talked about is men and women experience love differently and have different markers of love. To speak from the man's perspective, I think men feel love most through respect. So when the woman really respects the man, he's going to feel the most love. Respect, support, I think it kind of coincides. So to give an example, I once heard of a scenario where a man feels very respected from a woman. And there's many different ways that looks. But just to give you an example, a guy sitting down, all his friends, they're at home. His woman walks in. She comes in, says hi to everybody, is very polite, very nice, very kind, and then offers to make some food or get some drinks or do this kind of thing. That is respect because you are an extension of me.
Right.
And amongst my friends or the people that I value, that I have closest to me, they're going to now ultimately respect me more and think, wow, look at this. His woman actually really respects him and cares and supports him enough that she's willing to put effort forward to accommodate us and make us feel at home or feel welcomed. These are acts and efforts that we can consciously put in. And then you've infamously said to me many times how women feel love through safety. So touch on that.
Yeah, I think while men do feel love through safety, through respect, we feel love through safety. Of course, there's respect, but it's more so, it's a safety. It goes beyond the physical safety, right? Like you want to know that the person you're with will protect you, of course, but there's also the emotional safety. And that's because we biologically tend to be more emotionally wired. So we want to know that we can come to you and you're going to hear us. Because like you mentioned earlier, men tend to be more solution driven and solution focused. And that is an incredible quality. That's one of the best things that, that makes up a man, of course. But we want to know we can come to you, right, and feel safe to do so. And when we don't feel that, we disconnect, right. And so it's about understanding the harmony and the dynamics of a man and a woman and how we each operate. And it's a learning curve. And while I personally believe there's sort of a blueprint to masculinity and femininity, and then you define and you refine so and so, it's important to understand those dynamics because it leads to harmony, more peace, more love, and understanding. And once you have that understanding, you can move so much more. It's smoother, right? And then it's easier. Right.
So safety, physically and emotionally. It's very important for a woman.
Yeah, I was very long-winded there. Yeah.
No, but I love it. It was a very, very good answer.
Yeah.
A lot of clips from this one, Rebecca. I think we're gonna have a lot of clips. But how important is it? Like when you meet somebody, you obviously are gonna have somewhat of a connection. You share your values and everything that we got into, you have a connection. How important is it to maintain that connection and what does that look like?
Oh my gosh, this is like you meet somebody, you're over the moon, and then let's say you love somebody. The question is what happens after that, right? And so relationships are going to go through ups and downs. There are going to be several obstacles that come up in your lifetime and love changes. The quality of your love changes. But if you value this person and you have chosen this person because you respect them, because you love them, then this is where love is the choice. So maintaining it becomes a choice. It's like when they say, oh, you have to keep dating your partner. That is the truth. You have to, because you loved and you fell in love with this person because of how they are, right? So one, you can't extract the things that make them them. That's one. That's how you maintain. You don't stop them from doing all the things that they love because that's why you love them in the first place. And that's what makes them them. So in doing that, you're now asking this person to be someone they're not, right? In order to fit this vision that you have. And then at that point, that's a different conversation. But then in maintaining that, it's continuing to grow together, continuing to understand each other. Because as you grow in life, as I grow in life, we're going to keep evolving. So we have to keep getting to know each other. And that's how you keep the spark alive. That's how you keep the interest going. That's how you maintain that love while still maintaining what we each value.
And I think that a lot of different things are going to change throughout your life too. So it's worth communicating like where you're at. Where are you at right now? Like what's going on here? How are we doing here? What's this? Communicating that because let's say you're going to have kids one day, right? We have kids and then now that's another thing in the mix that's going to require a lot of energy from you and then from me.
Right.
So when that, and it happens to fall a lot more on the woman because of the nurturing aspect, and that's the appropriate dynamic that I think leads to the most successful relationship, which we'll get into next, which is masculinity and femininity and the nuances around that. But establishing that consistent conversation of connection and that effort to maintain that connection, whether it be date nights, or things that you're doing with your partner, doing something new together, doing a podcast together, doing many different things with each other, even outside of your regular, everyday, same thing. Because what did Jay Shetty, was it Jay Shetty or was it Ed Milet that said, Because, and I have to bring this up, there's a lot of times where people are in restaurants. Take a look when you're around in restaurants. Sometimes you're sitting down. Maybe you're on a date. Maybe you're with your friends. You look around and you see a man and a woman sitting at a table and they're not even talking to each other.
Right.
How unfortunate is that? Because they obviously don't spend too much time together, and eventually that connection can build. But I think a lot of couples are together, but they're not. They're
But
together,
do they like
but they're
each
away.
other?
Right. So it's important to maintain that consistent dialogue and have just you and her time or you and him time. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So it's basically like doing an inventory check on your relationship. Hey, are you still happy? Is this still going in the direction you want it to go? Are you feeling fulfilled? Are you feeling heard? But these are questions that require a level of awareness, and depending on the depth of relationship you want to have.
Awareness is the word.
Yeah. So it's like we can have this conversation, but there are people with dynamics, let's say, where, you know, they're fine with, let's say, not changing themselves. And and I don't want to say it's surface level, but the depth is different. So somebody having an inventory check to a person who maybe doesn't really value that kind of growth or value checking in that way, it's not going to come naturally.
Do you remember when you first did that? You did never try. I'm like, why? What's wrong? What happened?
Yeah, no, and it's like a shocking question, and it can generate nerves and triggers for some people and so on. But it's coming from a place of love, because you're like, hey, you know,
Where are you at?
Where are you at? Are you still happy? Or, you know, am I getting too comfortable? Are you getting too comfortable? And that's another thing that comes with relationship management is comfort. For me, and you know this very well, you can't get too comfortable. You want to be comfortable to a degree in which, you know, you're happy with this person, so and so. But when you get too comfortable, things kind of fall through the cracks, and that's going to happen as well. But it's important to keep putting in that conscious effort in dating that person and maintaining that person. So you've attained the person, but what are you doing to keep them? Right?
That maintenance is important. You must maintain it, because it's like anything in life. It requires effort and consistency.
Right.
And love does that. Love does require that. Nothing more shameful for me, Rebecca, when I see stud athletes, guys that I used to know that were absolute studs, and that get fat when they're in a relationship. I know, to say it bluntly, it is what it is. If we're going to have real conversations, we have to be real. And there's nothing more unfortunate about that. They get into a relationship and then all of a sudden they blow the fuck up. They get fat. Why? Because they're getting a sense of comfortability. They don't need to pursue women anymore. They've arrived. I don't think it's a good long-term solution. And I think you'll probably resent yourself, and you might attribute that to the relationship, and it could cause some issues within your relationship. But maybe the partner does the same thing. So I think it's important to keep each other accountable.
Yeah, and people also respect people that respect themselves.
Right.
So if you hold yourself in a high regard, you respect yourself, you value your well-being, you're not going to slip on those things, let's say. Because it's important to you, you'll continue doing that with or without the person you're with. And that's kind of where, for a lot of people, once they get in relationships, they forget about themselves.
Right.
They forget about their own needs. They kind of forget about what they value because, oh, well, I have a person now, so I'm good. You think that person's just going to love you anyway? They should love you. But you can't completely remove everything that person fell in love with you for.
Right. I agree. I think that's
Right?
100% right. And it kind of all circles back to the beginning, doesn't it? Values and respecting yourself and learning to be yourself as an individual. And to just kind of show respect to that intro to the conversation, I want to kind of lead to our last segment, which I want to talk about, is masculinity and femininity. This is one topic I really wanted to unpack with you because I've learned a lot about it from you. You've led me to certain content, podcast conversations,
Likewise.
right? That have provided me with some sort of insight. What does masculinity and femininity mean to you, and is that important in a nuanced relationship? And is the nuance of masculinity and femininity important in a relationship?
I think it is. And I think it's interesting how the conversation is surfacing on every single platform, and it's
very
top of mind
popular
for
right
a
now.
lot of people, right? And I think it's because more people are grappling with this concept of, it's never disappeared. It's more of that traditional lean, right? So masculinity, when you think of that, it's a man. can he lead? Does he have discipline? Does he have ambition? It's that kind of thing. Women tend to be more attracted to men who have that drive and have that leadership ability. That's kind of what that is, right? Where femininity for a man, it's more so us stepping into our true essence, our biological nature, which is, you know, we are more nurturing and this and that. And so a man might, if he values family and children, he's going to be drawn to a woman who possesses those qualities.
Exactly.
Right? So that's what that is, but this is not new.
Right.
This has been since the beginning of time. But it's just in the last few years that, you know, certain things have been normalized that are not in this traditional box.
Exactly. And I think it's an active effort by our culture and things like modern day feminism, to be honest with you, that are absolutely deteriorating the nuclear family and deteriorating that nuance of masculinity and femininity, which for the most people, maybe not everybody, but for the most people, that is the components to a successful relationship. When a man is in his true masculine and a woman is in her true feminine. So just to touch on that further, as a man, you should lead. As a man, you should look after. As a man, you should protect. These are important components of a man, and you should always be, now to throw in a little bit of the other side of it, be willing to learn, be humble, be eager to grow, and then put that effort forward to show up as a true man, lead by leading with intention. And femininity is nurturing, is caring, is protecting, but in another way, emotionally. Men need a woman who can provide that physical touch, can provide that light edge. A lot of times men are very, like I said, solution oriented, but also hyperactive, and our minds move quickly. And especially when you're in true masculine, you may be at times needing some relief. And to have a woman that can bring that soft side and help you settle in a way that you can then be your best self and be the best partner for that woman, and then ultimately she can be for you. I think the nuance between masculinity and femininity goes a long way, and that's why it's becoming so popular.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, think about it. If you know the way men and women typically operate, men feel love through respect and women feel love through that kind of safety. So let's say your dynamic is off. Let's do a test.
Sure.
If you're in a relationship where that dynamic is off, what would happen if for a day you started appreciating what your man is doing for you and you show him that respect and you make him feel like a man? Wow, thank you so much for doing that and for thinking of me. His ears are going to perk up and be like, wow, I feel respected. I feel valued. Or, hey, thank you so much for taking that initiative. Because what you're doing is you're complimenting his innate leadership abilities, right? You're making him feel like a man. And I'm not saying the way I'm saying it, it's not a game. It's not anything like that. It's just about respecting your partner, appreciating them. And that in itself goes a long way. Or let's say your girl's coming to you and she has an issue. Maybe instead of all you want to do, the way you want to give love is provide a solution.
Correct.
And while it's coming from a place of love, she's only hearing it as he's not hearing me. What if you paused for a second, you heard her and said, I understand what you're saying, or whatever it might be, and then you provide the solution. She'll now feel heard, and then she's coming to you as a leader to help. And now you're also doing that, right? So when you kind of understand that harmony and that dynamic, you can quickly turn things around, and you'd be surprised at how much your relationship can evolve in the best kind of way.
Yes.
Appreciation, love, and respect go a long way on both fronts.
And I think that when a woman's in her masculine and a man is in her, and a man is softer, and first of all, I don't think the woman respects it. I think there's that they won't respect it as much when a man is in his feminine, let's say, and vice versa. For
Women don't want to feel, they don't want to be in their masculine.
Correct. Maybe they feel like they have to because the man isn't in his masculine, so they're compensating.
Right. So if you're in a relationship and let's say the woman feels like she has to be the leader, or they say wear the pants, you're not in your true feminine essence. Then you have to ask yourself what you want. Do you want a masculine man who can lead and you're willing to relinquish the reins on that, or do you not? Because that's also a different conversation, right? And if you do want that, then it's time to change the dynamics. Allow him to lead. Let him show you that he can lead. But if you're constantly, let's say, taking the control because you don't like the way he does something, well, there's a difference. He's leading. You're just not liking the way he's leading.
Right.
So it's about appreciating what they are able to contribute And if you want some, like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah,
There,
I do.
it's so complex.
It is complex, but I think it's the best path forward for
Yeah.
people is to look into that. Express yourself in your true masculine, express yourself in your true feminine, because our culture's doing a tremendous job at destroying that. And I think long term, it doesn't do us good. But the successful relationship is the collaborative effort between two individuals coming together in their true essence, working towards something better. And I think that's the best way to kind of wrap it up and to go into our final segment, which is called Salute. Salute is the final segment on Couple Casuals podcast where I give an opportunity to the guest, today being you, my wonderful girlfriend. So what salute do you have for the audience today?
Well, I always say this, but you as an individual, man or woman, are enough, but you have to believe that you're enough. And with who you attract is a reflection of your self-worth. That's what it comes down to. And something else is a relationship rather is not an endurance event. If you're in a relationship and you're like, oh yeah, like, we made it to 10 years, or oh yeah, like we did it. Are you happy?
Right.
Because it's not an endurance event. So it comes down to your worth. It starts with you. And if you're in a relationship, continue working on yourself. And just the most important thing you can do is continue developing yourself and not losing yourself. Because so long as you keep doing that, you will maintain a level of love and happiness, and the right person will follow and grow with you.
It's well said. And I wanted to kind of cover that too, is this like notion within our culture that we kind of, oh yeah, wait till the bills come kind of mentality, or oh yeah, like I'm getting married, it's all over now, it sucks now, or whatever.
Crazy statements.
It's jokingly in a lot of the ways, but how stupid do you look? Because you're the one who picked her, or you're the one who picked him. So our partners are an extension of us, and I couldn't be more grateful and proud of you. And thank you for coming on. This was a wonderful episode, and I think that a lot of people are going to take a lot of value from it. I know I'm definitely going to listen to it back, and we get to watch it years down the road. So long may it continue. I love you, nobody else. And until next time, salute.